The final big deadline is April 1st of next year. That's the deadline by which we have to start doing actual selling cannabis to constituents and customers. So to back up to the first big date, June 29th, we don't really exist yet. And so right now, the Department of Health has the statutory authority to run the medical marijuana program, to be doing all the work around it. And so come June 29th, somewhere around midnight, we're going to see this cool passing of the baton from the Secretary of Health to Superintendent Trujillo, where we have the statutory authority. So why do you care about that? Because that means that what we're doing right now is that we're already acting hand in hand in partnership with the Department of Health, because they have the statutory authority now. We will have it by the time we hold our first public hearing, okay? So there is, I'm not used to being in a small desk at home. The state registrar has this sort of deadline, and we can send this to you if you're interested. It's not, but I'm happy to share it with you. You have to give notice to the state registrar on this date if you want to publish a rule on this date. And then there are the other state requirements around public notice, having a hearing, et cetera. So we gave notice to the registrar on May 5th, I believe it was, May 6th, that we are going to be doing a rule hearing in June. And so the Secretary of Health and Superintendent Trujillo submitted that to the state. And essentially, if you guys have done rule hearings before or covered them, we provide a summary of what the rule hearing is going to be about, so them with the basic information, how to access it, how people can give comment. All of that is going to go public on Tuesday, on May 25th. So that's the statutory deadline for us to share the draft rule. We will, by 8 in the morning, on our website, and we'll share the link so you all have it, so you can bookmark it and come visit often. We have a quick link for public hearings, notices, and public comments. So on that page, we will be sharing a copy of the draft rule, a copy of the public notice that we filed with the register back in May, information on how to give comment. People can give comment through snail mail, through email, and on the website itself, people will be able to submit comment there. It's going to be set up so if Dan Boyd, I'm going to pick on you, Dan, because you're there. If Dan Boyd comes on and comments and says, these are the best rules I've ever seen, I'm impressed, and clicks enter, sometime later that day, that will be posted on the website. So that way other people who are interested in the industry can see what other people are commenting on. One of the things that we're navigating about right now is just that we anticipate there will be some brief comments, but that there may be comments that could be in the tens, if not hundreds of pages of data or research, or here's what I think you should do instead. So we're trying to accommodate for all of that. So by law, we would have to give 30 days notice from May 25th to hold the hearing. We're giving a little bit more. We're going to go till June 29th, which is the first day we exist and have the legal authority to hold a hearing. So at this point, I know that we're sort of in motion with the new CDC guidelines that came out about a week or so ago about masks and people being in public, et cetera. For now, we have been planning that this meeting will be done virtually through a Zoom link. I don't know I don't know, and honestly, the legality of if we decide to let people come in person, does that mean we have to start out I don't know that sort of stuff, but we're going to have a public hearing, take public comment, and be as open and transparent as we can be. So that's sort of the big thing that's coming. The first rules that we're going to share with everybody on Tuesday are for the producers. Again, that's the first group on September 1st that we have to start licensing. And the reason the bill was done that way is because it takes, depending upon who you ask and how you grow your cannabis, anywhere from 3 to 4 months to 6 months to get from a seed or a clone into a plant that's flowering into a product that you can actually sell to customers. And so that's why the producers were done months before everybody else. And so this document, which is about as cool as I told you it is, lists off that about every 2 weeks, there's an opportunity for us to post a new rule, which triggers a new public notice, which triggers a new public hearing. That's going to be our life through the holidays, and with Robbie taking the lead on that. And so our intent is not to just do one giant rule that covers advertising, labeling, testing, everything, security. We're going to break them up into smaller rules for a couple of reasons. One of which is to allow us to continue to make progress in a thoughtful way. Part of it also is in anticipation that there may be legal challenges in the cannabis world. We are wanting to ensure that if we've got this rule in the bank and it's done and people are okay with it, that if a different rule gets challenged, the whole thing doesn't collapse and we're back to zero doing nothing, right? And so part of the, I think if we had had our druthers and ideally we would have done what I think some of the other state agencies have done that had a little bit more time, like on the methane rule, was I think if we could have had the draft rule and just shared it with industry and the public and not like officially shared it, but like put out an option just to get a good sense. We just simply don't have time for that now because of the statutory deadline. So let me just walk you through real quick. We're going to hold a public hearing on June 29th. Let's assume everybody says these are the best rules we've ever seen. This is amazing. You guys should do this for a living. That means to us that we could probably start issuing licenses to producers in mid-July. And Juan will talk to you more about that here in a little bit. But let's assume we need to make the term as substantial changes to the rule. We get a lot of good feedback. There's some things we decide we want to do differently. We have to post a new version of the rule, give it another 30 days notice, and have another hearing. And so, we're looking at not necessarily a best or a worst case scenario, but a likely scenario. We hold a hearing on June 29th. We have to make changes. We have to hold another rule hearing. That rule hearing likely is going to be in early August. And what I'm wanting to avoid for the sanity of all of us, including you, is that we not be in a place on the last day of August where we are in court litigating the rules, coming up against the statutory deadline where we have to implement. We're having to get a judge to sign some sort of a legal action that forces us to start issuing the licenses so we can get people going. We're trying to avoid that. And so that is one of the many reasons why we are trying to be super open, super transparent, super collaborative, and just, shine the light of day on this process and what we're doing. So that is my afternoon caffeinated fast walkthrough of the things that are coming. I'm happy if you all have any questions about any of that to take it now. If not, I'm going to pass you off to Robbie and let him talk to you a little bit about his portion of the presentation.
If there's any questions, if you could raise your hand. Are there any questions? Dan Boyd, go ahead.
I've just got one, John. Is the first rule you mentioned that the draft rule will be unveiled next week, will that include the plant count limits for the producers?
No, that will be in a subsequent rule.
Okay.
And I'll let the super in a minute when we get to her. She'll talk to you about why that is and why we're separating it out. But, we have continued to tell the LNPPs, the people that are the producers in the medical program, what we put in the letter that many of you wrote about or covered a few weeks ago, which was that as far as we are concerned, the medical providers are to continue under the rules promulgated by the Department of Health until we are able to promulgate our own rules, giving the new direction under the Cannabis Regulation Act. And so I'll let the super talk about that in a minute. Before I pass to Robbie, I will tell you all, if you haven't already signed up, go to our website. We'll share the link. We have started doing an e-newsletter every week that goes out every Monday. We'll be sharing information about upcoming rule hearings, notices, major events that are going on within the division, doing some public education around cannabis, things that we're learning that we want the public to learn, a lot of the sort of data. Before I pass to Robbie, the final thing I'll just tell you as well is that we have been really fortunate to find that this has been a very collaborative and positive community across the country. We've been holding meetings with the commercial cannabis division in Colorado and Washington State. We have meetings set up with other states as well, where they're working with us and telling us, this worked great for us in our state. You might want to do this differently from what we did it. You guys should be, concerned about this. Check this out. That's been a real useful tool for us. As this is becoming a national issue, potentially, of more and more states legalizing, there's a national organization called CANRA that brings together cannabis regulators from across the country to share best practices, what we can do, what we should do. And so there's really been a wealth of information that's been a great resource as we work together with the Department of Health here and on the rules that we're putting forward. And so that's been a real exciting piece of all this. So most of you know that I could clearly talk for a whole hour, so I will selectively stop. And I will pass it off to Robbie and let him introduce himself and talk to you a little bit.
Thanks, John. Like John mentioned, my name is Robbie Sachs. I am the Deputy Director of Policy for the Cannabis Control Division. Very happy to virtually meet you all. So I was just going to talk briefly about the CRAC, the Cannabis Regulatory Advisory Committee that we're putting together. As I'm sure many of you know, under the Cannabis Regulation Act, the CRAC was established to help us promulgate rules. It's made up of a lot of different stakeholders, from public defenders, DAs, police departments, which is kind of statutorily built in, and they'll assign particular people to the CRAC. Superintendent Trujillo has the authority to pick people from different areas, and in the spirit of collaboration, which John touched on, and I think has kind of just been a through line throughout this entire process, and also I think established in the CRA itself. There are a lot of different diverse stakeholders at the table. So I'm sure you all have seen the various different categories of people who will be sitting on the CRAC. If there are any questions, like John mentioned, you can check out the website. We were very lucky that after our deadline, which closed on May 3rd, we had about 160 applicants apply. Their names are also posted on the website in case any of you all are interested in seeing kind of the swath of the people that applied. So the statutory deadline for putting together the CRAC, like John mentioned, is September 1st. We're hoping, since we have everything in, that we'll get that done relatively soon, hopefully by early June is the goal, but we'll see. I wanted to, echo John's point of collaboration. It's been really great to work both internally with different departments, but then having the CRAC put together will really help us in our rulemaking process and hopefully make better policy, which was the intention in the legislation itself, and something I personally believe in. So with that, unless there are any questions regarding the CRAC, I will pass it to Superintendent Trujillo.
Thank you, Robbie. Appreciate that. So I too will just echo what's already been said. That was a really comprehensive, and I'm always grateful that John has as much caffeine as he needs, because he does a great job of getting the message across. We really have been working very, very diligently, long hours, to try to get the rules taken care of. John, I, and Robbie, at the very least, there may be others that are pulled into this Game of Thrones this weekend in trying to get those finished so that we can literally publish them Tuesday morning. It's our commitment to make sure that that's there at the 8 o'clock time frame. But we even are getting, edits and comments today. I'm sure we'll get some again this weekend. So there's a couple of things that have changed that I'd like to just give you kind of like a heads up that you might hear from producers as soon as those are published. We're taking a little bit different perspective in the way that we're managing the business side of it. We're not doing anything on the patient side, and the changes that we're making to the business will have no impact on the medical, the safety of the cannabis. None of the changes that we're making will make the medical cannabis any less safe for those who are using it. In fact, our goal and our directive really from the legislation was to make sure that adult use cannabis is of the same high quality and grade as the medical cannabis. So there's no difference, and what we're doing won't change that. So a couple of things that we're changing is in regards to the employees. We don't have authority in the new rule, in the new statute, to really to require anything of employees. In the past, there have been background checks, there's been IDs issued by the Department of Health, and they've checked personnel files. We don't have the authority to do any of that. What we will be doing, though, is requiring that the company themselves do specific trainings. And we're going to start, we're scheduling some opportunities to meet with the Department of Higher Education here in the next couple of weeks. So you can expect to see those later. So we're taking a little bit more hands off on the actual employees and leaving that as a business responsibility. We're also changing the applications significantly. We've gone on a couple of tours of producers. We visited a manufacturer and we visited a retail store. And one of the things that we heard across the board was that they were submitting anywhere from 4 to 5 inch notebooks. And in many cases, like 3 of those 4 to 5 inch notebooks. I'm going to let you listen to Juan, our IT expert, and he's going to explain to you what he's doing to turn that around. But essentially, the applications, we're hoping to open the door on applications with an online application platform. And much of what has been required in the past, we're just going to ask for certification that they're meeting those standards and then require those things when we go for an inspection. So they don't have to submit them to us. We likely wouldn't have the ability to read that much documentation anyway. But when we go out to the facility, then we're still maintaining every right to look at employee policies, safety diagrams, all of those things, but they're just going to certify to those things. Of course, the biggest issue that's changing is the fees. And we're working on adopting the fees from the statute. There's a couple that we're up to that we're working on some strategies for that. And we'll have some, those will also be included in the rollout. Like John said, we're not going to roll out 2 things that everybody wants to know about. One is we're not going to roll out a plant count because we've got a company that's involved in a research project for us to look at that supply and demand formula that the statute requires us to do. That research is not going to be ready until sometime mid or the end of next week. And even then it will still be in draft form. And so we're not going to have that information in order to roll it out. But it's not going to be it's not going to be so important that we get it out in this round because, as John said, we've got another round that's just coming right behind that, and it'll still be in plenty of time. The other thing that you're not going to see in the rules that everybody wants to know about is how are we going to limit the plant count? So what's our strategy, proposed strategy for doing that? At this point, we have not made a determination based upon the research that we've gotten and the information that we've been given, and even talking with producers. We haven't made a decision whether that plant count limitation is going to be based on canopy size, square footage, or actual plant count. So we're just not prepared to do that. And we've met with the current licensed producers this morning on a similar type call, and we explained that to them, so they're not going to be surprised that that's not going to be there.
Superintendent, interrupt you real
yes.
quick. Could you talk a little bit about what those differences are? And I just want to flag for everybody on the call that different states regulate this in different ways. And so options are around by canopy, by plant size, by acre, by square foot. Different places are doing it different ways. And so if you could just talk a lot, most about that.
Yeah, no, thank you. I was teasing Bernice yesterday. I said, I'm really voting for the canopy size because there are some states that are measuring that with drones. And I am ready to build a drone fleet at RLD, and I'm ready to be the captain of it. But in all seriousness, the canopy size is you take the size of the area that you're going to grow within, and you measure that. So you measure wherever there's going to be plants growing. It's very similar to the square footage, but there's just a little, very little variation. The square footage is probably better for outdoor growing, so that because it's easier to measure an outdoor, whereas the canopy is going to be easier for greenhouses or warehouse buildings. The challenge with the canopy and the square footage is that you've got to write language in there for when you have multiple layers. So we've seen 2 layers of plant count at a producer where they've got, it's like a shelving system. And we've learned that in Arizona, there are actually, they've got 4 layers of plants growing. And so you've got to make sure that you've got language to define each layer, not just the overall size of the building. So that's the difference between really the square foot and the canopy size. The plant count is fairly easy to figure. What kind of threw a little bit of a wrench into my thought process and what information we've got was yesterday I discovered, and I guess I probably should have known this before, but all of this is fairly new to us, that there are some producers who have indoor and they have outdoor. And the indoor is just a little bit different formula than the outdoor. And I don't know, and I went to law school, so I didn't have to do math. But somehow or another, I've got to be able to figure out if you want to do this percentage of canopy and you want to do this percentage outdoor square footage, how do I balance those out to make sure that you're not getting any more or any less than somebody who does all or part of another? So I've got some pretty significant questions around that we're going to have to sit down and really talk through. But I would say that those are probably the biggest differences in the new rules from the Department of Health rules. And with that, if you don't have any questions right this minute, I'll turn it over to Juan to talk about the technology and how we're trying to get that stood up as quickly as possible. Juan?
Thank you, Superintendent, and thank you everybody for being here and providing me the opportunity to kind of speak about this stuff. Like Deputy Blair, I could talk about it for hours, so somebody throw something at me if I go on too long. Right now, the department as a whole is going over a very big modernization effort. We are right now building out our licensing platform, our licensing portal for our boards and commissions. And so right now, cannabis coming on board, the timing couldn't be better because we're going to be able to leverage a lot of what we're doing over for the boards and commission side of the fence for cannabis. So although the timelines are extremely tight, we're able to use a lot of those same architecture kind of patterns and different things to be able to take in the applications. And really the goal of this effort is to enable constituent relationship with RLD. What we want them to have is have access to their data, have a platform that's, as Superintendent says, as easy as Amazon to use. I've taken that to mean, and it's been my driving kind of principle, to be intuitive, for people to be able to understand and relate with easily. And also to be able to provide notifications of their statuses, anything that might be missing, they could get those notifications directly with interactivity, right? So they could come back to the portal and say, hey, this is what I was missing before, here's this or whatever. And that's going to be the same pattern for all of our licensing applicants. But for cannabis, the issue is because we're going to be doing this, if the rules are great on the 29th and everything's perfect, the goal is to have this application portal for cannabis available on the 15th of July. Now, while that is very tight, again, what we're doing is we're using a platform called Salesforce. And Salesforce has tools, this particular branch that we're using has tools that enable licensing. And so we're able to stand up these licensing systems quicker than what would normally be done because we don't have to do any coding. We could do a lot of configuration. So if the rules do change, because these draft rules will be out on Tuesday for publication, we're going to take those and start using those as kind of like the guidelines. But as they change and be revised or anything like that, we're able to go back into the tool set and revise and reconfigure as needed. So we'll be able to respond to the changes that we need to respond to, and we'll also be able to enable better relationships with our constituents. Right now, I think, the process on the medical side of the fence is going to be greatly improved by these electronic tools because we're going to have a way to kind of store all of their information and not have to worry about searching through paper and through the notebooks and things like that. So that is kind of like the high level overview. The timelines are very tight, but they're also very doable and very, very possible. If I thought that they were at any way, shape, or form untenable, I would say so, but the evidence suggests that this is something that we can do. We have all assurances from everybody that this is definitely something that we can accomplish, and I'm looking forward to it. And I'm looking forward to getting this done. So, does anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Juan. I'm just going to close up before we go into the actual on-the-record questions with everyone. I want to point out a couple of things that have kind of come up in the past as we've talked with reporters, and that we don't have authority over. One is there's been questions about local control. The department was not given authority to make sure that the local governments were adhering to the local control piece of the statute. That local control is in the act, but there isn't any mechanism for us to force a local government to adhere to it, right? There is some time and manner law, language that's in the local control. And that part is really, the reality is that ultimately that's going to have to be determined by the courts. So that's one area that we just don't have any authority over. Another area that we don't have authority over is the criminal actions. So we have civil authority, and we have authority to take action against licensees. In the event that there's someone who's doing unlicensed activity, that would be criminal, and it would then be rolled over to the local district attorney or the attorney general's office, because again, we weren't granted authority to enforce criminal criminal penalties. And the last thing that has been coming up is taxes. Not only do we not know taxes, but we are not going to be the enforcing body of that. That's going to be the Taxation and Revenue Department. So with that, I know we're a little bit early, but we'll go ahead and move to on the record and your questions.
If you have a question, if you don't mind raising your hand online, Dan Boyd, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. And I wanted to ask a little bit about the timelines and some of the statutory timelines. It sounded like, if I understood John, that that some of that, like the application, could be opened up and kind of launched before the statutory timeline. Was wondering if the rulemaking goes smoothly, if you think that the retail sales could also begin before that April of next year deadline.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the answer is it could, right? And that was the reason that we built into the statute no later than. So on all of those responsibilities that we thought we could have we might be able to get it done sooner. We did get the statute to have that no later than. And the last holdout for us was the going live with the commercial sales. And we were pretty nervous about that. I'll just be honest. Like at one point we thought, maybe we needed to have even later than April 1st. But it seemed pretty clear that the goal was to try to get that sooner. And so, our goal would be to take it live with commercial sales before April 1st. But we're not going to really be able to give anybody kind of an indication as to what that might look like until we start rolling out some of these other responsibilities, because that is all dependent upon this other first step that we have to do.
Thanks. I think that makes sense. That's all I have for now.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Dan. Are there any other questions? What do we have? Rebecca Nathan?
You have a question?
Yeah, can you, just for on the record purposes, go over all of the important dates that were mentioned before and what needs to be met by those dates in order to proceed forward?
Certainly. So aside from the date when the act goes live, right, which is June 29th, the important dates that we have responsibilities to accomplish certain activities is just 3. The first one being September, no later than September 1st. And that's when we have to start licensing, or at least have an application and begin processing applications for licensure for producers. And that's going to include producers and micro producers. We also have to give an equivalent license to what we're calling legacy, which are the currently licensed under the medical cannabis program. We also have to begin assigning them a license that's equivalent to one that they have. Now, one of the things that's important to note is that we're not going to be processing the vertically integrated and the integrated micro business before, earlier than September 1st. That's going to take a little bit different rules because it also includes manufacturing and retail. And so as we move the legacy licenses into licensing, the first thing is going to be the producer license. They'll continue operating under the Department of Health rules until we adopt rules for the manufacturer and the retail. The next second date that's important to recognize is no later than January 1st, and that's the date that we have to start licensing everybody else. And so that's why we'll continue to do rule hearings from now until probably January 1st. We're trying to get it done sooner, but that's the second date that's important for everyone to know. And of course, the third date we've already talked about, and that's the no later than April 1st for the commercial sales.
Thank you, Rebecca and Nathan. Morgan Lee.
Hi, thanks. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
I had a question about what came out in your correspondence with some of the producers, where the tax waiver on medical marijuana, there's going to be a limit there, and what's the rationale? Where does that come from? I assume it's seems like there'd be weird outcomes if you didn't have that kind of limit.
Yeah, and there's obviously some litigation on that, and so I can't really talk about that at this point. We're reviewing that, and but I will respond to the letter to the extent that it's our interpretation, and that was pretty clear in the letter, that the authority that the department, regulation and licensing department, takes on June 29th is everything under the Cannabis Regulation Act and the licensing aspect of the Lynn and Aaron Compassionate Use Act. For the most part, licensing was removed from the Lynn and Aaron Compassionate Use Act, but there was language in there just to make sure that we didn't miss something. The medical registry remains with the Department of Health, and that includes their responsibility to determine adequate supply.
Okay. And at what point do you decide on the dollar amount of fees on each plant?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
$50, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, we can go up to $50, but I just am going to have to wait until we get the research back, because that's another piece of the research that we're looking at. I can tell you that when you see the draft rules, you're going to see a proposal in there to do a leveling. So we can only give out one producer type license, right? The producer or the micro producer. So we don't have a lot of flexibility on the types of licenses that we can give out. But we believe that based upon our requirement to limit plant count and to charge a fee per plant, that it gives us the flexibility to level those out. And so we're going to propose 3 different levels of ranges of plants that that will, a fee will attach to level 1, a fee will attach to level 2, and likely a fee will attach to level 3. But we're still kind of trying to work through that. We have the ability under the statute to collect fees in relation to the cost of the program. And at this point, we don't really know a lot about the cost. We do know that other states are operating on anywhere from 20 million up to 30 million. We're not going to get to that point, obviously, in the first year, but we just don't have those decisions. I need some more data, Morgan, in order to have a really good explanation of that. What you might see is some plug numbers in there just so that we can maybe get some response from the public. But it's at this point, we don't have the research that we can actually put a firm number in there. And so what I would expect to see is in our next rollout of rules, which will be just shortly after these rules are posted. You're going to see another set of rules shortly after that. You'll see that research reflected in actual numbers at that time. That's my hope.
Okay, thanks. Another thing I'm just curious about is as different segments of the industry start to get licensed or turn in applications, how much of that will be sort of transparent in a fashion where journalists, other industry players can get a glimpse of the competition, the kind of like the market scaling up? I don't know how much, how visible that might be. I was wondering if anybody can speak to that.
Yeah, so Morgan, we don't have plans to have the licensing database just up and available for, but you're going to see it, right? And none of it's confidential. And so one of the things that we're trying to make sure that we do as we draft these rules is that we're trying to make sure that we're not asking for information that has to be kept confidential. Now, in the case of doing a background check, you actually do have to ask for a social security number or a tax identification number. You have to ask for birthdays. So there's some really specific stuff that we just can't get around having to ask. We also have to make sure you're 21 or older. But in regards to financial documents, we don't believe that we have a responsibility to collect financial documents, and we also don't believe that we have the ability to keep those financial documents confidential. The Department of Economic Development Department has language built into LEDA that allows them to keep those financial records confidential, because it's not proprietary information, but it definitely is used by competitors in a really negative fashion. And so that might be one of the things that we look at having amended, is to give, if the legislature believes we need to have those financial documents to make sure that there's no illicit money being used on this industry, then they're going to need to write that in. But we believe that they're also going to need to give us the authority to keep it confidential. So we don't plan to collect that kind of data. Everything is going to be open. You're going to be able to ask for or see everything, but you'll probably have to ask for it. I guess what I'm trying to say is we're not just going to put it out on the internet for the world to peruse through.
Thank you, Morgan. Next, Dan Boyd, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. I had another one, Superintendent. I'm trying not to call you representative here, but can you tell us where things are at with kind of filling some of the job positions with the new division, including a division director, and kind of when you hope to have some of those decisions finalized?
Yeah, I know Robbie's really hoping that, we can increase the employees by more than 100%. And we just need one other person for that. So we're really, we would like to fill those positions as quickly as possible. What I can tell you is that we've got somewhere in the neighborhood of 13 positions moving over from Department of Health, but we're still in negotiations with that. Nothing's written in stone yet in regards to that. It looks like it's probably about 8 filled positions and 5 vacant positions. Those vacant positions we would try to post as quickly as possible. That money will be part of the money that rolls over from DOH to our department to cover expense, personnel expenses. But in regards to the employee job descriptions that are listed online, we have been getting, I haven't heard how many resumes we've gotten, but it's my understanding from our HR manager that we've gotten quite a few. And her and I are going to meet on Monday and go over those and potentially set up interviews. And those are all exempt positions. So those are positions that serve at the pleasure of the governor.
Thank you, Dan. Rebecca and Nathan, you have a question? You can unmute.
Yeah, my question has to do with the advisory committee. Obviously, there is more than 160 people who have applied. Who's in charge of making those selections? And is there a requirement as far as their background, or is there any background checks required as far as criminal history or anything like that? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, thank you, Nathan. So I ultimately have the responsibility for good or for bad to make that final decision. This is much more of a collaborative process. And so I've glanced through the names, but I haven't really studied the resumes and the letters that were provided. Our staff is taking a look at that. John's been working on it. Robbie's been working on it. And they're kind of sorting through, they got them into categories. What we really want is we want someone who is going to be committed, because it's going to be a significant amount of time. We want someone who has an interest in cannabis and some experience in the area that they applied for. But we also want someone who has the skills to be a voice for that community. And that doesn't just mean, talking about what their thoughts are. It means being able to go back to the community that they're representing in some fashion, very similar to, being a representative. How do you get input from your constituency group that you're representing so that you can speak on their behalf? So we're really looking for folks who can have that ability, and we, John and I and the rest of the staff personally want to make sure that we've got some diversity in all of the different ways that you would look for diversity, including geographically.
Super. If I can add in real quick.
Yes.
Nathan, to your question, the law provided there were 17 positions on the committee. Of those, 4 were designated without any authority from the superintendent. So the first is the chief public defender or their designee. And then 3 other positions are a representative from the DA's association that they pick, a representative from the police chief's association that they pick, and then a representative from the sheriff's association that they pick. Of the other 13, the bill provided that people have specific either experience, or they use a term, professional group, I think is what they use, but they identify it as, for example, someone who comes from a labor organization, a qualified patient, someone who's been participating in the medical program, someone who has expertise in public health. And so on the application that was on our website, we asked people to self-select which of the categories do you think you could qualify or that you have experience or background in. And so we are looking at that criteria for people. And so there were some candidates or applicants who picked one category. There were some applicants who picked every category. And so it just depends on the person.
Thank you.
Thank you. Morgan, you have another question?
Yeah, I wonder if there's any time frame or if you've already had any interest in agreements with tribal entities, which was part of the legislation.
Thank you, Morgan. We actually met with the secretary for the what's the term, John?
The Indian Affairs Department. We met with Secretary Lynn Trujillo.
Yes, thank you. And so we met with her and one of her staff, and we've already, we're asking them for some input on even just the appointment of that position. Once we get a little bit where we're not in this delay, like this time period where we're just really trying to get through these producer rules, we'll have a little more time to reach out, but we are in communication to start having, and it's been our commitment that aside from representation on the CRAC committee, that we will likely pull together a task force that is a stronger representation of the tribes, Pueblo, and the nation here in New Mexico, and have some conversations with them in regards to how can we help support you and how do we move forward with anyone who would like to enter into that kind of an agreement.
We answered everybody's questions. I don't see any hands up anymore.
You guys are a great group.
Well, we're closing a little bit early. Superintendent, would you like to do closing, John?
Yeah, John, why don't you
So I put together a song. No, I'm kidding. As I mentioned, we are going to be hopefully doing this regularly, not to the point that you feel like every Friday you have to come hang out with us. But what we're going to try to continue doing is sort of an engagement campaign to, like, when we learn new things about what's worked in New Mexico, what's worked in Colorado and other places, we want to make sure that we can be a resource for all of you. What I would really flag for you is that I know Bernice shared the website link at the beginning. If you're looking for great graphics to put on your TV screens or in your newspapers, the website provides, we try to translate into human English from legalese the explanation of the powers within local jurisdictions, so what cities or counties can do. We have a breakdown of important terms to help people who may not be familiar with the industry figure out what we mean when we talk about producers, things like that. There is a breakdown of the important dates there that shows you the things that the superintendent laid out for you. And our goal is really to reinforce that this site be the first source for anyone, whether they're reporters or consumers, whoever it is, that this is the best place to come to get the best information and most accurate information about what we're doing. So we will continue to update that as we go. But I anticipate that we will hear from some of you next week once we post the round of the draft public rules. So we're happy to continue talking with you about that. And again, I come from the place of there's no stupid questions. And so I want to reinforce for all of you to feel free to call any of us here if you have questions about, well, I saw this in the rule and I don't know what this means, and that sort of stuff. We're happy to, we just want to make sure everybody comes from the same page on this information, that we're working in sort of the right direction of what is coming. So with that, we appreciate your time. Have a great weekend. Morgan, do you have a question?
Hey,
are you waving to me, Morgan?
No, it was one last thing that I meant to ask earlier. I'm sorry. I've seen at least one county commission already talking about or thinking about maybe putting in their own, and you kind of addressed this earlier, their own sanctions for smoking in public outside of, I don't know, maybe consumption areas. You guys don't touch that, or how does that get resolved? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the law is pretty clear that smoking out in public is not authorized and in public places. And so, yeah, that's interesting, but it's pretty clear that that kind of activity is not authorized under the law.
Yeah, I think the discussion was about upping the ante on the $50 ticket or whatever you call it. But anyway.
Some of the rules, Morgan, I can tell you for local jurisdictions, there's a short list of things they can do, and there's a longer list of things they can't do. And, you know, for example, they can determine sort of the density of cannabis establishments in their community. And I think that comes from some of the debate during the session about concerns about what people called a green mile, which would be that all the cannabis retail shops show up on the bad side of town. And you know, and so they can make a determination of density, which would be there can only be one cannabis retail shop every block. They could say something like that. But the provision requires that it has to be a reasonable distance. So it can't be, you know, the city of Albuquerque says there can be one retail shop every 500 miles, right? They can't do that because that would limit it down to one. So it has to be a reasonable nexus. And I think the super spoke to that earlier about that designation may ultimately be something that's out of our hands and in the hands of the courts.
Okay, thanks.
Morgan, I will say, though, that we're using the language, and you'll see this in the rules, we're using the language that the Alcohol Beverage Control Division used in regards to the measurement of the 300 feet. And the reason that we're doing that is because it's already been challenged in court under the prior rules that that division had adopted. And that's a City of Santa Fe case. And I just happen to know it because I was on the school board when that happened. And we were fighting against the Giant store over there on the corner right across the street from Sweeney Elementary. And so that case law is kind of established. And so we're using that same language for measurement.
All right, I will assume that none of you get to call it and start your weekend now. So good luck to you on the rest of your afternoon. We very much appreciate you all making time to talk with us. And like I said, if you have offline questions or want more information, we're happy to be of assistance and communicate with you. So thank you all very much. Have a great weekend.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.